second session, everybody. What's really nice is that people are starting to talk to each other and create one of these communities that Chris was talking about earlier. And really the big point of today is just to get this discussion started and start talking about some of these issues around accessible fieldwork. So it's really nice to see that that process is starting already and can hopefully continue throughout the day. I'd like to introduce Angela Bentley from Aquinas College in Stockport. And Angela's going to be talking about some of the challenges around taking students with disabilities on fieldwork within a secondary school context. So over to you, Angela.
Hello. Let's get started. My name's Angela Bentley. I've been teaching for about 18 years and I've got quite a responsible job trying to get people up into the universities for you lot. And I regularly take students on fieldwork. I've taken about 140 students on fieldwork in the last 2 weeks in various sort of stages, slightly sunburnt actually. And I'm responsible for all the fieldwork within the department. That includes residential and day trips. So why do we bother to take students out? What's the point? Well, you know, in the classroom we have them with files and propped up books and this is dip and this is strike. But actually when you get out into the field, it's very different to actually measure it with a clinometer and to actually really see dip and strike. In fact, I was just in Castleton and we were looking at the dip of the limestone beds, which are at about 30 degrees and were laid actually at 30 degrees. And we had them working out, have these been tilted, what's been happening? And then they came to the conclusion actually it was a fall reef and that's how they've been laid down. And so that sort of thing, they actually see it in real life. It means that they can then put that into their exam question responses. So getting your hands dirty, hands-on geology, tell them to get up close and personal with the rocks, as this student here, Lewis, did in Iceland, and he loved it. So, but that should be for everyone, not just healthy students, it should be for people with all sorts of difficulties. And I'm going to talk about 3 case studies with you of students that I've taken on field trips in my time as a teacher. This here is Ewan, and he's a really, really keen geologist, very, very keen, and he wants to study geology at university, so expect his application to come onto your doormat any day. And Ewan has only one arm. He has many difficulties associated with that is not just about the amputation. People with one arm can get on quite well. I've known other people with one arm. Ewan has other difficulties. He's on very, very strong pain medication, which makes him very, very tired, which is an issue when you're out in the field, of course. He can't fall in the field because his cancer was triggered by a fall. If he falls again, he could end up having cancer again. So this is an issue. Also, he's spent a lot of time of his life in and out of hospital. And as a result, he has friends who've died. So he ends up being sort of, it can be a bit sad sometimes and can be slightly depressed occasionally. So he has all sorts of effects there really with it. So he has lots of issues. A lovely, lovely student. I couldn't meet a nicer, hard-working student. He can't balance very well. He can't carry any equipment. We did take him abroad. I'm going to come to that in a minute. And he carries liquid morphine, which is nice to get through customs. And he's also a little bit of a perfectionist. Everything's got to be right. He likes to know what's happening. A little bit of a control freak, I suppose. And without those sort of controls in measure and knowing what's going on, he can get very anxious. So, what do we do with Ewan? He has his own risk assessment. I'm sure that you have risk assessments in universities. I have one for each trip that I run, but he has his own personal risk assessment. He has a support assistant who comes with him in the field. We need to make sure that his medication is in a secure place, can be locked away. He has to be able to rest, so that can be difficult as well. He's one to power on through, so he doesn't like to admit that he's tired or anything like that, so you suddenly see him white and looking a bit sort of collapsed at the end of the day, and you have to sort of negate that happening because else he wouldn't be fit for fieldwork the following day, so it's quite hard sometimes. He can't do up a zip on his coat, that sort of thing. Buttons are a bit difficult as well, so he needs someone to help him dress a bit as well, so he's got a lot of issues there, and we do our best to try and accommodate him. So I took Ewan to Naples. So where's the pointer? There's the pointer. There's Ewan. He wasn't the only child on that trip with disability issues, and he wasn't the only child with his own learning, with his own risk assessment there. And as you can see here, we're by Charles Lyell's columns, which was very nice. And as I say, very, very lovely trip. But what did we do for Ewan? We took a support assistant for him. This was paid for by the college. I rang the agency who I went with, which happened to be Eurotours, and I asked them, could they do anything? They gave us £200 off the extra staff place. There's an issue though. Who pays for that support assistant? Is it Ewan? Do we charge his family? Do I up the cost for the rest of the students going? It actually came out of a bursary budget that we have at college. But those budgets are becoming more and more squeezed, and it's becoming increasingly difficult to be able to find the funds to take somebody like Ewan with us. We always would try and find the funds, but it is something that's a practical consideration that really needs to think about. I also had a little bit of money for a taxi for Ewan. He got tired one day. Him and his support assistant and a couple of other girls who also had some issues got in the taxi and went back to the hotel early. It meant that we could do that. So having that extra staff member made all the difference there. The sleeping arrangements were difficult as well. Because Ewan gets tired, he was wanting to go to bed at 8 o'clock and go to sleep. He didn't want to be in a room on his own because he wants to socialise with other students as well. So I put him in with one other boy in the end, but I put him in a room next to where all the other boys were, so that the other student could go in and out of both rooms. But it's very, very difficult. How do you room them? It's not always easy when you get to a hotel and it's about where the location of the rooms are. We managed to get him next to the assistant that he was with. So there were lots of practicalities there, and sometimes, as I say, you've got to be flexible when you get there, but we just made sure that the company, the hotel and everybody were very, very well aware of what we needed, but it's not always easy. I think sleeping arrangements is probably the worst one for me with students. So I'm going to talk about somebody else now. Ewan in many ways was extremely easy. His difficulties are quite obvious. His mother was very open with us. We knew everything that was going on. But some parents don't tell us. We don't hear what the difficulties are, particularly if it's mental health issues. And sometimes I don't even find out about them until after the trip or during the trip. Sometimes it can be very, very difficult. I took 120 students to Blencathra in November last year, and really I can't rate them highly enough. Janet there, I muck around all the time. I'm ringing her up, changing numbers, telling her this child needs this and this child needs that, and so needs a room where they can lie down quietly, and she's fantastic. But Katie has panic attacks. I knew that. I didn't know the rest of it. I found out that she self-harmed whilst I was on the trip. I found out that she'd tried to commit suicide a few times, a few months after I'd been on the trip. So very, very difficult girl to deal with, a difficult situation. And how do you cope with a panic attack on a mountainside when you've got 20-odd kids there? Okay, it's not necessarily an easy thing to deal with. You can't leave her. Panic attacks tend to be contagious. So if one starts, they all start. So that always drives me mad. I can't leave her with one other member of staff and just go off, hi, see you later. That's not fair either. Ideally, you try and leave them with a friend and a member of staff fairly nearby, but often students like that don't have very good friends because they've got all sorts of mental health issues and they don't make friends very easily, so that can be a difficulty as well. So what I tend to do is I try and take my group off slightly, or the 20 off. I might be talking to them about the geology, but I'm within shouting distance of whoever is dealing with Katie having the panic attack, or I'm dealing with Katie having the panic attack, whichever way it goes. It's not always easy, and you have to assess it individually. It's really, really difficult sometimes. I have had members of staff take students back before. It's about having a good staff to student ratio, which again is expensive and can be difficult. Again, sleeping arrangements for Katie were difficult. Once I realised that she had the issues she had, you then have that thing of, oh, you can't put her in with some innocent little 16-year-old, because some of my students are very cotton wool-eyed, and they wouldn't know what to do with Katie. Somebody like that, they'd be freaking out. And it's not fair to put the responsibility of Katie on some other child. Katie can't ever stay in with staff. That's always totally inappropriate. Also, without parental permission or prior notice, we can't put her in a room on her own. Again, there are issues with that. So it's very difficult. In the end, there was a friend that we could put Katie in with, and she was quite a streetwise girl who would have come and seen staff if there were issues. And we just kept a close eye and kept checking on her and making sure everything was okay. We did that quite in a way that Katie and her friend probably didn't really realise that we were sort of checking up on her all the time. And we were lucky she was on a next door or very close to a staff room. But again, that's difficult. The most difficult thing with Katie's case was that I didn't really know much about it before I went, which didn't make life easy. So I'm going to now tell you a little bit about Peter. And this was quite early on in my teaching career. And he had quite severe Asperger's. And he used to put socks on 100 times on and off and that sort of thing. His mum offered to come with us, and we said, oh no, we'll be fine. Took him to Iceland. And we said, oh no, don't bother, that's fine. And we took him to the Blue Lagoon. And I'm sure a lot of you have been to the Blue Lagoon. This is a different trip, but it's quite murky. You can't see much below that, really, below the surface. And actually, I was making a joke. I stood there in the Blue Lagoon, sludging around. And I said to my colleague, oh, I could be stood on a dead body here and I wouldn't know about it. Anyway, we get to the bus, we're counting kids, and we can't find our student. And we said to one of the other boys, oh, will you go back to the boys' changing rooms and help? No. We have been with him since we were 5. He's your responsibility, not ours, and we are not going back into that changing room. Okay. There was 2 female members of staff, and we didn't have a male member of staff with us that year. So the Blue Lagoon were fabulous. They went in, they found him sat there in the changing room, put his socks on 100 times before he could come out the door. And once we knew he was safe, he was fine. But, that sort of 10 minutes or so of thinking I was feeling bodies on my feet, under my feet in the Blue Lagoon was a bit scary. It was difficult. He kept getting up in the night, turning lights off and on. He was having showers in the middle of the night. I had another student come and say, please can you re-room me? I can't stay in the same room as him, which of course we accommodated. The child who did stay with him, we actually bought him a present in the end, but it was very, very, very difficult. I think the answer to that is make sure you know your students, and I would in the future have said yes please, and I learned a great deal in that period of time about taking students on field trips. As I say, it was quite early in my teaching career. I don't make that mistake now. So I would say planning is really the big key as a teacher, taking them. Trying to liaise with the parents really helps. And we had a meeting with Ewan and his mum prior to the field trip, so that we could then know. And actually, Mum said, if he falls, he falls. Don't worry about it. We will deal with that when it comes. And that was a big relief, because all I'd seen written on the paperwork was must not be allowed to fall. I'm thinking, I'm taking a mountain here. I can't guarantee he won't fall. So, and he's not allowed to be knocked either, Ewan, so it's a bit difficult. But Mum had said, if that happens, it happens. Take him, let him enjoy himself. So that was very good. You need to have good personal risk assessments. That can be a bit time consuming. At college we have like an SEN department, a learning support department, and they actually do the individual risk assessments for that student, and then I tweak them for that student for the actual field trip, which helps. You do need to be flexible. Sometimes you do have to stop and turn round, and that can happen in all sorts of ways. I was listening to the thing with the hornets. I had a dead sheep last week, and there was a girl panicking over this dead sheep, and I thought, they're not going to learn anything. I went right round and took them to another site, because I thought, they're just not going to learn, there's no point in doing that. So you have to be very flexible. And I would say have enough staff with you to be able to cope with situations. That's the expensive bit, because actually on a day-to-day basis, if nothing's going wrong and you're taking your student with you, actually you probably don't need to have that many staff. And so heads often don't like saying, well, I need so many staff, and it's like, well, why? You know, that can be a real difficulty. So my thing here is it can be really, really difficult taking students out. But it's rewarding, very, very rewarding for both us as staff and for the students. And you get to know your students in a different way, particularly when you take them out at the beginning of the year. That's when you get to know your students. I noticed Ewan gain confidence. He made friends. He found it, a child that's in and out of hospital all the time doesn't always have good social skills, hasn't always been able to make good friends. And he made friends. He's a lovely, lovely student. So that's really nice. It was lovely to see him blossoming and coming out of himself and becoming more confident. And the social side of taking students out on field work is almost as important, or maybe even more important than actually the geology that they're learning in many ways. So I think that was something that my students, or the students, all three of them that I'm talking about, really sort of gained. All students should be able to see how geology works in real life. It is different when you're out there in the field. So I think if we can take them out, we should. I do use virtual field work, but if I can take them out, I do. But it's difficult sometimes, as I say, overcoming some of these logistics. And probably one of the big things is it really isn't very cheap. So that's it, really, I think. Yes.
Okay, does anybody have any questions for Angela?
I can just shout, it's fine. Hi, I was just wondering, I teach at university, so we technically deal with adults. So we don't often have that interaction with the parents. How have you got any experience on how to actually get the students to come forward and talk to them about it? Any sort of hints or tips? Because I have actually found myself stuck in the field with a student whose only response to anything was to burst out into tears. It turns out she had mental health issues, didn't tell me about it.
Yeah, I've had that before as well. The parents don't always come forward, it's difficult. And some of my students are over 18, and they don't always tell, that if they're going through mental health issues, they don't always tell the parents anyway. There's a confidentiality thing, so we have that. And sometimes we have that thing of, actually, we know they've got mental health issues and the parents don't. You know, that can happen as well. Not very often. I think just about being open with the students and trying to have this sort of culture of, please tell me if there's anything I can do. So before I start off, I say, one of my things I always say to them is, I can work with the known, I can't work with the unknown. So if you tell me, I can deal with it. I mean, we've even had students who can still wet the bed. You know, we've had issues with that, and I'm sure you probably have that at university as well, because it's one of those things that can be lifelong issues, isn't it? So when you have that, we always try and say to them, come and just tell us if there's any issues. Come and tell us on the QT, because nobody's going to put their hand up, are they, and tell you that they've got an issue. So I just say, just come and tell me quietly, or just send me an email, and we can deal with it. And I can deal with absolutely anything. And actually, I often use the case of, I've had students wet the bed, and then they think, actually, my thing isn't as bad as that, or, oh, I'm like that, and they feel less embarrassed. And it is trying to keep the embarrassment out. But yeah, and actually, sometimes the parents can be very, very over anxious, and then they're saying to me, my child can't do this, my child can't do that, and I think, they can, I've seen them do it, you know. So that's another one that can sometimes be better off without the parents, to be honest. Yeah. Yes.
Yep.
I was just going to follow up on that. At universities, we're not actually legally allowed to interact with parents without the student's knowledge, so it's more complicated than even whether the parents do or don't want to get involved. Unless the student tells us and gives us permission, then we can't engage in that. So
we have the same, once they're over 18, we have the same issue. We're not allowed to do anything. We actually have the same issue with their A-level results. We're not allowed to tell the parents the A-level results. And sometimes they don't tell them, which is always a challenge. So, yes.
I would say that Gillick competence means that even at 16, they can withhold information from parents.
Yes.
And that does come back. I mean, I'm also from an outdoor education background, and was a chief instructor in a field study centre for 9 years. And in the last 3 years, I probably was with 20 school groups in Iceland. The thing that you probably hasn't mentioned, and sometimes causes problems in the field, are young teachers who think they are kids and do their own thing and introduce risk, put demands about things like single rooms in hotels, which mean that you end up putting kids together who shouldn't necessarily be together, because their individual privacy as a teacher is much more important than the role of the whole group. So
yeah, I would agree with that. I think inexperience of teachers on field trips, it can be an issue. I had an issue of that just on a day trip 2 days ago, where actually one of my students swore at the student teacher who was there. But actually it was the student teacher's fault, because they had forgotten the line between being, they're only young, in their early 20s, and they hadn't got that line, and they teased the child. And they can't take teasing at 17, 18, and yes, they swore at her. It's a very difficult issue, and that's just a minor thing. When you're out in the field or on a residential trip, it can be a very big issue. I would agree. The only thing with that is, I'd say everybody learns, and that student teacher learnt a huge amount on Wednesday, and I was there, covered it, made everything all right. But yes, and I know they won't do it again, because, as I say, they're sort of like, oh right, I see. But yes, I agree. You do need people with experience on trips. So it's about bringing people through, isn't it?
could I just follow up on that one as well? And in some ways, it's not just experience; it's about competences. So, particularly at university, we're competent geologists, or certainly we'd hope we are. But we're not competent in many cases to make judgments about mental health issues. So there's a whole range of things that we're not really trained to do, and probably feel quite uncomfortable being trained to do. So, I think we do need to think about what competences you are required to be a field leader.
Yeah, where's your job end, sort of thing. I mean, I'm a trained first aider, but that's my nobody's asked me to do that. That I've volunteered to do that. But it is difficult, isn't it? Where does your job end? Where does being social worker, mum, and what else? Because I feel like a mum to all the students. They always laugh at me with that. And mine is slightly younger, of course. But where does that line end? And there is a sort of responsibility line that you have to say, actually, I'm standing back from this. This isn't my job anymore. And with Katie, I'm certainly not trained to deal with her. And all I do is I write everything down, and I send it on to the learning support team that we have, and I make them aware of what's happened, and then somebody else will deal with that. But yes, we have that issue where her parents may or may not know that she had panic attacks on that weekend. I don't know.
And something that you're probably a bit more experienced with than us at university level is you seem to be dealing with panic attacks and anxiety quite a bit in what you do. And you get to this, difficulties in the field. I think we've all been there, where you have one student, you're trying to walk along a cliff face, and they suddenly go, I can't do it, I can't go on. And you didn't know they had a phobia of heights. And I've been in a situation before, I've coaxed someone along on their hands and knees, and you're in a situation, you can't make a thing of it, you can't let the other students know, but alternatively, what you don't want to do is let the phobia win.
No.
And it's important for the student to get over that hurdle, to make sure that they don't encounter that later on, they know they've done it. Would you be able to give any advice where you think that line is between what is good for the student in terms of pushing them on versus when you're actually going to do them detrimental harm because it's pushing them way out of their comfort zone?
Yeah, I mean, this was a thing with Katie, for example. She went on another trip to London, and she went down all very well. And there was a teacher there who was with her, a young teacher, who was sort of pandering to her all the time. She ended up unable to walk until another member of staff turned around and said, "It does not say in anywhere in your data or risk assessment that you need wheelchair or walking or any assistance with walking. If you cannot walk, I'm calling your parents. They're going to drive down, pick you up, and that's it." Do you know that child walked then? There wasn't another complaint. And that is a fine line, isn't it? And I think that comes with experience of knowing your kids and sort of feeling how panic attack it is. I mean, there's obviously a point where they get to hysteria and you can't do anything. But you don't really want to get them to that. I did have a child who crawled up Vesuvius. She was very ill. She'd been very ill the night before. And she's a beautiful looking girl, not one to lie in the dust at all. And she kept lying in the dust, and then she'd crawl up a bit more and lay in the dust. I had enough members of staff that she had a member of staff with her while she did that. She was determined to get up there. When do you let the phobia win? I think that's probably down to the individual student. If they turn around and say, "I'm not doing any more," then how much can you do then? You can't force them to do something that they refuse to do. But I think if you can coax them along, I do. I can be a bit firm as well at times, but there's a line, isn't there? And I don't know. It comes with experience, I suppose. But yeah, I feel for you, being there.
One more question for Angela? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.